This evening, we're going to be talking about the life and historical legacy of Malcolm X. I wanted to share a little bit of background about why we're going to be doing this event this evening. So for me personally, Malcolm X is one of my greatest ancestors. He was a fearless freedom fighter for the freedom of Black people. He spent his life tirelessly fighting for that end before he met his violent demise, before he was assassinated. And so for me personally, when I was 12, the first book I purchased with my own money was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And it kind of set me on this path in life where I ended up earning 2 degrees in African-American history and eventually came to be doing anti-racism work here at BRJA. And a big part of that was because of reading this book and reading about the life of Malcolm X. And I feel like he is someone in history that is so important to Black history, but to American history, but he's also a figure that a lot of times is just not covered in our educational system. And there are a lot of thoughts and feelings about who Malcolm X was, and I want us to just kind of delve a little bit deeper during this hour and a half into his life and his historical legacy. And at this moment, we have a journaling prompt. Hopefully you all have something you can write with, even if you want to pull out your phone and write some notes in there. But I really want us to take a few moments and think about these journaling prompts. Excuse me. We'll take a few minutes to journal. And then if you would like to share your thoughts, your reflections, feel free to pop those into the chat, or feel free to share with the group once we are done journaling. I'll read the prompts for you now. When you hear the name Malcolm X, what are some words, phrases, images that come to mind? In what ways have you learned about who Malcolm X was? So we'll take a few minutes and journal quietly now. All right. Hopefully that was enough time for you all to journal and reflect. Feel free, like I said, to put anything you would like to share in the chat. Would anyone like to share aloud with the group any reflections they have on the journaling prompts?
I was thinking earlier in life and things like rebellious, extremists, all these kind of things came up when mentioned Malcolm X. And then it was so interesting how I learned differently in my own learning as an adult. But that's kind of what I was told about Malcolm X in early life.
Thank you, Anthony. Anyone else like to share?
Hey everybody, if you can hear me. I was gonna say even the picture that you use for like the flyer, like that image really stands out to me, and I think how I think about Malcolm X even before I truly learned about him. Like so, he's usually characterized as like the opposite of MLK, and so therefore he was like not peaceful. He was angry. He was, for using violence, and so that picture of him peeking out of the window with a gun was always used as like to see he's violent. And then I think once I learned, I understood like, oh, okay, like I understand why that picture exists. So I think he's always been just a really like used as a kind of a foil for MLK, but like this kind of angry, like, no nonsense, but aggressive use of like anger for Black people.
Thank you, Julia.
No problem.
Would anyone else like to share? All right. Well, I hope you all continue to reflect on what images or messages you've received about Malcolm X, or maybe you haven't really received many messages about him. Maybe you don't really know much about his life, which also says a lot as well, right? So I wanted to share that while researching for this event tonight, some things that came up for me that I want us to be kind of thinking about is Malcolm X's relationship to violence, his the ways in which he talks about violence, the ways in which he's so easily embraces the concept of violence. And I want us to be thinking about also his views on being a separatist versus Martin Luther King working towards integration. As Julia said, a lot of times he's presented as a foil historically against Martin Luther King. And I also want us to be thinking about the work that he did, which I don't think he gets enough credit for, as one of the forefathers of the Pan-African Black Power movement, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and we're going to listen to some snippets of two of his speeches and watch a little bit of a documentary. And I would say to you all, we only have an hour and a half here today. I would really encourage you. We're really blessed that so many of Malcolm's speeches have been caught on tape or have been written down. It's really accessible to read the things that he left for us. And it's very powerful, the things that he had to say. And I would really encourage you to take the time. Even if you're not someone that likes to read, you can just listen to his speeches on YouTube. And very pertinent even till today, right? And also, the documentary is called Make It Plain. It's on PBS, and you can watch it free on YouTube. It's 2 hours long, but like I said, because of time constraints, we'll only be able to watch a little bit of that documentary this evening. I apologize in advance if it feels like we're jumping around in the documentary. Because it's 2 hours long and because I wanted us to focus on certain aspects of Malcolm's life, it will feel like we're jumping around a little bit in the documentary. So I apologize for that ahead of time. At this time, we have a guest with us today, Mr. David Miller, and I invited him to give us some historical context around Malcolm X's views. Some people like to say that his views were extreme. I think if we think about his views within the historical context, maybe we won't feel like they're extreme. So I want him to talk a little bit about that. And he is joining us this evening graciously. I know, Mr. Miller, I know you have a busy schedule, but he is currently working in academic training and uses his innate skills to lead intergenerational conversations with men and boys focused on fatherhood, parenting, mental health, and managing anger. And he is currently a doctoral candidate at the School of Social Work at Morgan State. And he also is working on a book for children about Malcolm X, and he's been doing a lot of research on his own about Malcolm X. So I just thought he'd be a great person to talk to this evening. Thank you for joining us, David.
Good evening. How you guys doing?
I'm doing good.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can everybody else hear? Okay.
Yeah, I'm actually posted up in my car.
Okay.
But I think, and I know you had some questions, I think the conversation for me is particularly intriguing just by background. Born and raised in Baltimore, grew up in West Baltimore, and I never learned about Malcolm X when I was in school. I actually discovered the autobiography of Malcolm X by accident. One day I had cut school. I was a freshman at Walbrook Senior High School. I'd actually cut school and gone to the Pratt Library, and a older gentleman saw me and some of my friends kind of hanging around, knew we belonged in school, and just started to engage us around a conversation about Malcolm X, and suggested that we read the autobiography. And for me, it was a game changer. Because even though I grew up in a, great parents, 2-parent household, mom was college educated, I still didn't know whether or not I wanted to, go to college and, be a productive member of society, or did I want to sell dope like so many guys in my neighborhood? And so reading the autobiography of Malcolm X was really started me on a quest. One, realizing the failures of public education, because I didn't learn about Malcolm X. I didn't learn about Garvey. I didn't learn about Nkrumah. I mean, there were just so many. I'd never heard of an Ella Baker. I'd never heard of a Mary McLeod, Bethune. Then I began to really feel robbed, cheated, if you will, because of the lack of serious attention around people who were game changers. When you think about the landscape of American history, people who were game changers. And so, reading Malcolm started me on a trajectory. I'm not a classically trained historian, but have devoured probably almost everything that's been written about Malcolm, whether positive or negative. I know a lot of folks read Manning Marble's piece several years ago and were really frustrated by Manning Marble's account of Malcolm, in his life. I mean, the thing for me is that it's really interesting. And as I was talking to Michelle, I was telling her I didn't know if I was going to be able to even share with you guys today, because I'm actually leaving to go to South Africa tomorrow. And it's really interesting in how America always picks and chooses who our leaders should be. So, for example, it's okay for us to understand and read about Nelson Mandela and put Mandela on a pedestal, yet we never learned about Biko, right? Most of us have never even heard of Stephen Biko and the other freedom fighters and revolutionaries in South Africa. And it's the same thing when you think about sort of the Martin-Malcolm comparison. It's always that Martin was sort of the kinder, gentler, more politically correct leader, and Malcolm was this angry, black man. And that particular image of Malcolm holding that AK-47 was because his house was firebombed. Mm-hmm. And if you firebomb my house with me and my wife and children and kinfolk, you don't think I'm going to protect myself? And so I think a lot of the rhetoric around, Malcolm was orchestrated so that it could create this dichotomy between, say, good and evil, and who's a good leader and who isn't a good leader. And I think the sad reality is whether you're black or white or Latino, Asian, whatever your ethnic orientation is, that for the most part, we've kind of bought into this rhetoric so deeply that even today, children do not learn about Malcolm.
Right.
Right. It's really interesting, Michelle, because I'm teaching a class with a group of high school students in D.C. They go to Eastern, H.D. Woodson, Coolidge. They represent a couple of high schools in D.C. And I'm working with these young people, 10th and 11th graders, we're going to be publishing some nonfiction books. These young people are publishing nonfiction books. And none of them could tell me anything substantive about Malcolm X. Mm. 10th, 11th grade students in high school, they were like, oh, we knew he was a black leader. We knew he was killed. Never heard any of his speeches. And I think for the most part, we should be ashamed of ourselves that a child can go to school K-12 and not be introduced to Malcolm and not be introduced to the life and legacy of Malcolm within the context of Black Power, Civil Rights Movement, what was happening, as Malcolm started coming of age, 1950s, 1960s, even when we're looking at things like some of the more larger issues in American society, whether it's poverty, whether it's the war in Vietnam, like, how are you going to talk about those things and not talk about, Malcolm? And so I think that it is solely up to organizations like yours and others to make sure that young people have a serious understanding of history. Because when I talk to most young people, they just don't have any historical framework to understand like these critical periods of history. I'm introducing these children, young people, 10th, 11th grade, they had never heard of James Baldwin.
Wow.
10th, 11th grade, never heard of James Baldwin. I'm telling these young people about some of the projects I'm doing. Like I'm working on just FYI, I'm working on a book. It's really going to be a workbook focused on like sort of the 6 major developmental milestones of Malcolm's life. Because I write children's books, and I've also written a lot of curriculum material, particularly for young Black males. But we're going to use Malcolm X's life as a focal point to help young men understand that even if you've made some mistakes, even if you've fallen short, there are opportunities for you to be great. So I'm going to be, using Malcolm as a focal point. But then also have mentioned to these students a project that I'm releasing late September, early October on Nkrumah, Kwame Nkrumah. Most adults I meet, run into, had never heard of Nkrumah. I was showing these young people a picture of Nkrumah, Malcolm X, and Adam Clayton Powell. And so, for me, and Michelle, I know you had told me about the incident that happened with your son. For me, it's, I think, very painful that as citizens, we've allowed public education to ignore the life and legacy of Malcolm, which is an extremely fascinating life, even though Malcolm was killed at 39. Last summer, I was in Ghana, at the University of Ghana for 6 weeks. It had probably been my 10th or 11th trip to Ghana. 2 years before, when I was in Ghana, I met the brother. He's an elder. He was instrumental in the Ghanaian Writers Association. He took Malcolm and Maya Angelou on a tour of Ghana. When he was there, I've had a chance to meet, Betty Shabazz, a few times before she's passed. I've met a couple of Malcolm's daughters. And so, you know, I've been fortunate enough and have always had an ongoing, active, you know, relationship with the Nation of Islam, which again is another serious organization that our children need to have, you know, kind of a deeper understanding of the origin, the founding, the life's work of, you know, Elijah Muhammad, and how the nation and Malcolm have cultivated and saved the lives of so many Black men. I can't think of an organization in the United States that has redirected the lives of more Black men than the Nation of Islam. And I'm not even a member of the Nation of Islam. And Malcolm, you know, Malcolm was a byproduct, you know, of the nation. And so I didn't know Michelle or others if you had any you know, specific, you know, questions. But go ahead. I got a few more minutes.
Yeah, if you could quickly, if you could kind of put in some historical context. I know we talked about this briefly. So when we talk about Malcolm X embracing the use of violence for self-defense and for the use of fighting for the freedom of Black people, not only here in the United States, but globally, for Black people globally, and him also pushing against this narrative of integration and very much being a separatist, not just through word, but through action, through the work he did through the Nation of Islam. Could you give a little bit of historical context about what was happening for Black people at that time and how that shaped so much of what Malcolm was thinking and feeling and putting forward while he was here with us?
So you just asked me like 7 questions.
Sorry.
No. So I think the first thing that is super important to kind of understand is that Malcolm's father was killed in front of him. Malcolm's father and mother were Garveyites. Mm-hmm. They were devout followers of Marcus Mosiah Garvey and the work that Garvey was doing at the time. And because of that, his father was killed by a white mob. There's been some historical narratives that say they were actually Klan members. I don't necessarily know because I'm not necessarily a trained historian. I just know that Malcolm's father was killed by Garveyites. His mother had a nervous breakdown, had a series of, mental health challenges. Malcolm went to go live with Ella, one of his other family members. And so let's just think about that in terms of you witness your father being killed by white folks. Let's just start there. And then think about some of the other major things that happened to Malcolm. I get really frustrated when we characterize Malcolm as violent or as an extremist. When you have, when you look at some of the work of, Ida B. Wells, when you look at the history of lynching in this country, to not be willing or interested in fighting back when Black men are being hung and killed, Malcolm was sort of coming of age in terms of his enlightenment around the time that Emmett Till was killed. Emmett Till was killed, like 1955, Money, Mississippi. They kidnapped him. They beat him up. They shot him in the head. They tied him to a cotton gin and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. And so the story of Emmett Till is sort of one of those national stories that many people heard about in the North, but there were just so many other stories. I got a really good friend of mine named Wade Hudson. He runs he runs a children's book publishing company called Just Us. And I want y'all to check them out. They got the largest collection of Black children's books. Wade is about, 75. I remember we were in Cuba and he was just telling me, he grew up in a very small town in Louisiana. And he was just telling me these stories about being a boy and Black men would maybe get into it with white men, or there might be some kind of confrontation with a white man, and these black men would be missing. You just would never see them again, right? And this was the norm, you know, and it wasn't something that was on like the nightly news or whatever the case may be. So there's been a history of black men being killed, black women, you know, being brutalized. And so when you're growing up at a time, as Malcolm was, when there's so much racial division and strife, to protect your home with a gun, or to say, if you put your hands on me, I'm gonna make it so that you will never put your hands on anybody else. To me, that's not extremist. To me, that's logical. Right. I just think that we live in a time and place now where everybody wants to be politically correct, while at the same time, when you look at the death of George Floyd, if you look at the FBI uniform crime statistics, the numbers of black men and women who've been killed or shot or injured by the police since George Floyd have gone up. They have not gone down, right? And so when you look at the data, when you look at the fact that, you know, I'm a black man, I could be stopped by the police, I could be involved in an altercation. I just came out of Panera Bread. A white woman could say that, you know, that I put my hands on her, and the police could come and drag me away and beat me up and lock me up, and then I would have to get an attorney. And so we still see that there are a lot of similarities in terms of the America that Malcolm grew up in, particularly around the time he started coming of age to now. Black men and women are still being killed. You look at the young sister, Corinne Gaines in Baltimore County. There have been, and I've written about just the overwhelming number of black women that have been killed by the police that nobody talks about. There was a sister at, I think she was at NYU, wrote a book about the number of black women. Most of us have heard of Sandra Bland, because that was more of a national case. But so many black women have been killed, more than most people, you know, can think about. What's the difference between when Malcolm was coming of age in terms of his enlightenment and what's happening, you know, what's happening now? Right. We're still having conversations about, should we have a civil rights bill, right? We're still having conversations about, you know, about wages and how, you know, what's a decent wage to be able to, you know, kind of elevate yourself out of poverty. You know, we're still having these conversations about wars. Maybe we're not talking about Vietnam, but we're talking about maybe Ukraine and South Korea. So there are a lot of similarities between what's happening during Malcolm's ascension and now. You look at, and I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but when President Obama was in office, the number of hate crimes were rising. Right. You know, many of us on social media are hearing and seeing these incidents where you just out minding your business, and we call a white woman Karen, right? Where the white woman would just start, like, I saw a thing the other day about a brother at a lake near his house fishing. It's a public lake. There's no signs that he say he can't. The white woman coming up to him, like, harassing him, like, you can't be out here fishing. And so, again, when we think about Malcolm, let's also think about, and I'm going to shut down and take any questions you guys have. Let's think about this. What is the difference between when Malcolm was coming of age, and when I say coming of age, I mean in terms of enlightenment, connecting with the Nation of Islam, starting to read and immerse himself in books, versus what's happening now. But yet I think our conversation, you know, is very different. I think we tend to want to be very politically correct. Even when I listen to people who talk about things like what happened with George Floyd. I think we still tend to be very politically correct and afraid to say what we want to say. And I just think that Malcolm, because of who he was, because of what he witnessed with his parents, got to a point where he was just fed up with the hypocrisy in America.
Right.
And so, I mean, I'll just stop right there.
All right. Thank you, David. I really like what you had to say, that he was so willing to say what so many people probably were saying behind closed doors, but didn't feel comfortable saying out loud, right? In a very adamant and clear way. He was calling out white people for violence, historical violence. So I appreciate you saying that. Do we have any questions about any of the history around Malcolm X for our guests before he has to go? All right, thank you, David. I appreciate your time, and thank you for your work that you're doing with our young people and your research that you're doing on Malcolm X. I can't wait to hear about your book. Please share it with me when you get it done.
Okay, thanks a lot. Be safe.
Thank you. All right, so at this time, like I said, I want us to hear from Malcolm himself. I have a snippet of his speech, By Any Means Necessary. It's just about 4 minutes of him talking that we're gonna listen to now. And then we have an excerpt from another one of his speeches that we will listen to, or sorry, that I'll read out loud after that, and then we'll have a time for reflection. So Dana, if you could share that with us now.
We end today's show with Malcolm X in his own words, speaking in 1964.
One of the first things that the independent African nations did was to form an organization called the Organization of African Unity. The purpose of our organization of Afro-American Unity, which has the same aim and objective, to fight whoever gets in our way. To bring about the complete independence of people of African descent here in the Western Hemisphere, and first here in the United States, and bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary. That's our motto. The purpose of our organization is to start right here in Harlem, which has the largest concentration of people of African descent that exists anywhere on this earth. There are more Africans here in Harlem than exist in any city on the African continent, because that's what you and I are, Africans. The Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights are the principles in which we believe, and that these documents, if put into practice, represent the essence of mankind's hopes and good intentions, desirous that all Afro-American people and organizations should henceforth unite so that the welfare and well-being of our people will be assured. We are resolved to reinforce the common bond of purpose between our people by submerging all of our differences and establishing non-sectarian constructive programs for human rights. We hereby present this charter. Number one, the establishment. The Organization of Afro-American Unity shall include all people of African descent in the Western Hemisphere. In essence, what it is saying, instead of you and me running around here seeking allies in our struggle for freedom, in the Irish neighborhood or the Jewish neighborhood or the Italian neighborhood, we need to seek some allies among people who look something like we do. And once we get their allies, it's time out for you and me to stop running away from the wolf right into the arms of the fox, looking for some kind of help. That's a drag. Number two, self-defense. Since self-preservation is the first law of nature, we assert the Afro-American's right to self-defense. The Constitution of the United States of America clearly affirms the right of every American citizen to bear arms. And as Americans, we will not give up a single right guaranteed under the Constitution. The history of unpunished violence against our people clearly indicates that we must be prepared to defend ourselves, or we will continue to be a defenseless people at the mercy of a ruthless and violent racist mob.
Malcom X, speaking in 1964. He was born.
Okay. And at this time, I'm going to read an excerpt from Message to the Grassroots, which is a speech that Malcom X gave in 1963. And in this speech, once again, I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. But in this speech, Malcolm talks more deeply about his vision for freedom for Black people. He kind of solidifies his views and thoughts on Pan-Africanism, on Black power. And so I will read this now, and then we'll reflect. You haven't got a revolution that doesn't involve bloodshed, and you're afraid to bleed. I said, you're afraid to bleed. As long as the white man sent you to Korea, you bled. He sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, you bled. You bleed for white people. But when it comes time to seeing your own churches being bombed and little Black girls being murdered, you haven't got any blood. You bleed when the white man says bleed. You bite when the white man says bite. And you bark when the white man says bark. I hate to say this about us, but it's true. How are you going to be nonviolent in Mississippi as violent as you were in Korea? How can you justify being nonviolent in Mississippi and Alabama when your churches are being bombed and your little girls are being murdered? And at the same time, you're going to be violent with Hitler and Tojo and somebody else that you don't even know. If violence is wrong in America, violence is wrong abroad. If it's wrong to be violent defending Black women and Black children and Black babies and Black men, then it's wrong for America to draft us and make us violent abroad in defense of her. And if it is right for America to draft us and teach us how to be violent in defense of her, then it is right for you and me to do whatever is necessary to defend our own people right here in this country. The white man knows what a revolution is. He knows that the Black revolution is worldwide in scope and in nature. The Black revolution is sweeping Asia, sweeping Africa, is rearing its head in Latin America, the Cuban Revolution. That's a revolution. They overturned the system. Revolution is in Asia. Revolution is in Africa. And the white man is screaming because he sees revolution in Latin America. How do you think he'll react to you when you learn what a real revolution is? You don't know what a revolution is. If you did, you wouldn't use that word. A revolution is bloody. A revolution is hostile. Revolution has no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. And you sitting around here like a knot on the wall saying, I'm going to love these folks no matter how much they hate me. Do you need a revolution? Whoever heard of a revolution where they lock arms, as Reverend Cleage was pointing out beautifully, singing, We Shall Overcome? Just tell me, you don't do that in a revolution. You don't do any singing. You're too busy swinging. It's based on land. A revolutionary wants land so he can set up his own nation, an independent nation. These Negroes aren't asking for a nation. They're crying to crawl back on the plantation. So once again, this is an excerpt from the whole speech, which you can read or listen to when you have the time. But like I said, for time purposes, I only took out an excerpt. Do we have any reflections, thoughts on Malcolm's words, on Pan-Africanism, on Black power, on his use of violence?
that quote was that, I mean, that was just pretty amazing. And I had not heard it seems like the first part before that has always been baffling about America's weird relationship with us jumping into war. But then we always have this conversation about Black people needing to be peaceful when it comes to defending our humanity. So that was great to hear. So, yeah.
Thank you, Anthony. Honestly, when I was doing research for this, I was honestly stunned that Malcolm lived as long as he did, given the things that he was saying. So, because it was so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts, comments?
I was going to say, I think it's really important, particularly for what like Malcolm X, I think, really represents, is so many things. Even with MLK, it's like you have to actually question the fact that these two people actually were friends, like in a lot of ways. Like they actually realized, like, okay, well, we might quote unquote see things differently, but this is the same fight. And I think it's really important for people to think about that. I think that in a country right now that is currently telling us what is real history, what is the real story, if you as a white person especially have not learned about Malcolm X, or you have a very distinct view of Malcolm X, they have taken this information from you as well. And you have got to question a society that is continuously altering the story. And what does that mean? And it takes me to a quote, I think that Ta-Nehisi Coates said, like, I don't know how long ago, that, you know, America's not built on nonviolence. And you have got to question, and he was speaking, you know, particularly to Black people, while all of the white people's heroes are violent and while all of ours are nonviolent. Mm. And we see this happen year after year, you know, police killing after police killing, that violence happens to us, and our expectation, the expectation of us, is to march silently.
Right.
And why is that? And so I think that, you know, when people bring up Malcolm X, when they find Malcolm X, it speaks to that part of you. And so when I was hearing you read that it speaks so directly to that piece of me that is like, well, yeah, like, why are we not doing this? Because this is what's being done to us. And yeah, so I think that it's really important for folks to sit with those words, his words, like what they mean, and why is that being hidden from you? Why is it being hidden from us if we are a country that is built on honesty and telling the truth in history? Because I think that if anything, he was speaking not just about racial things, but like how this is really violent for all of us. And I think that's something that we should be kind of like, you know, really thinking about and reflecting on as well.
Thank you so much, Julia. Anyone else want to share?
I'm trying to, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm trying to understand, what was his final goal? We talk about separatists. What was the final goal of this revolution? Was it a separate place for Black people, or what was the final goal of how he saw the end of what he wanted to achieve?
So from my understanding, the final goal is freedom for Black people. And he did not see that ever being possible through the means of integration. Given where we are now sitting, 50 years plus since Malcolm said these words? Mm-hmm. I don't know that Martin Luther King, the things that Martin Luther King was pushing for have been successful. By all metrics, Black people are dying younger. Black people are being imprisoned. Black people are starving. Black people are earning less money. Where are the gains that supposedly were supposed to happen because of integration? And that was what Malcolm was talking about, that this was not a means that was going to get us to freedom. That was his goal, was freedom for Black people. Black people want simple things. They want to raise their families. They want to live in peace. And they want to be able to live.
So if integration isn't working, then how did he see the freedom for Black people happening, is what I'm asking. Because obviously Black people live all over the United States, right, amongst every other person. So how did he see this goal happening? I'm just trying to understand this.
So there were other people who have talked about Black people living separately and having their own land and their own space, right? There are other theories and people who have put things forth, including Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass at one point thought Black people should leave and go to Haiti, right? Marcus Garvey thought Black people should leave and go to West Africa. So Malcolm X was not the only person to have these ideas and concepts that Black people were never going to be able to successfully integrate into a system and society that wanted to kill them, right? So he's not the only one that thought that we needed to separate ourselves, have our own land, feed ourselves, arm ourselves. He's not the only person. So Black people, we don't have a country, right? We don't have, like other ethnic groups in the world, we don't have a nation. And that was something he thought that we needed in order to achieve freedom.
Okay. Did he say where this land would be?
I don't know that he did, but there are other people, like I said, who had theories around that.
Okay.
Adar, were you going to say something?
Thank you. So a couple things. So first of all, Martin Luther King his goal was, and nor was the goal of the civil rights movement, that third phase. It was not about integration. It was about the forced segregation and dismantling forced segregation, forced legal de jure segregation. And I want to point that out because in our schools, through white media, what we're taught is that integration was somehow a goal. When you read Martin Luther King's writing, integration was not a goal. The dismantlement of that forced legal integration, which truncated hopes and dreams, economic opportunities, all of that was. Malcolm talked about the revolution in the United States of America in the same speech. And he talked about the United States being born out of white nationalism. Mm-hmm. And when you go back and you read the foundational documents, Malcolm was telling the truth.
Right.
But this is not the history that we are taught. Other point, Malcolm did not come up with this whole self-defense thing. Even as far back as Ida B. Wells Barnett, one of her famous quotes was that a Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every Black home. But check this out, because this is the important thing. And it should be used for that protection which the law, U.S. law, refuses to give to Black people. So when we talk about Malcolm, or we talk about Martin, or we talk about, whomever else, Garveyites, whomever else, we tend to frame the issue from this whole thing of whether Black people were radical or whether they weren't radical or whether they were separatists or whether they are integrationists, when the central through line, no matter what phase in US history you're looking, is the violence and the anti-Blackness of white people. Not some white people, not fringe groups of white people, but white America, that for the bulk of its history has crafted laws and customs and protections to truncate the progress, the growth, the very lives of Black people. Mm-hmm. And when Malcolm talked about white devils, when Malcolm talked about Black people not acquiescing to being killed, whether that killing was by lynching, whether it was by a state system and federal system of incarceration, disproportionate incarceration of Black people. It was always about white people have to stop indiscriminately killing Black people. And if that's not the focus of our discussions, then why are we here? So it's not like what Malcolm did or didn't do. Was he radical? Was he not? Just in some. It is around what is this anti-Blackness and this violence of white people in the United States, where we even had to have Malcolms or Martins or Idas or a Winchester rifle in every Black home. Or will we have to like gingerly walk down the street now because we know that once we leave our front doors, or even when we're asleep in our beds in our houses, that just like it was in the Roger B. Taney decision, Black people still in the United States of America have no rights,
right? Which
white people, white law, white custom is bound to respect. All of these years later. So it's not whether Malcolm was radical or not. The issue is white violence still and white anti-Blackness. And the problem, again, is not the fringe groups. The problem is right in your households.
Thank you, Adar. Anyone else? I just want to make another point, piggybacking off what Adar said about how Ida B. Wells said it was her right to bear arms. And Malcolm also talks about the fact that because Black people don't truly have the right to bear arms, we aren't actually citizens. And he talks a lot about, this term of second-class citizens and that Black people need to accept, no, we're not citizens at all of this country, right? And getting them to accept what is actually happening to them in this country. Okay, we have no other comments or reflections. I would like for us, we have a half an hour left. I would like for us to watch some of the documentary. It's really well done. Again, it's called Make It Plain. It's on PBS. You can find it on YouTube for free. And it is 2 hours long, but we are going to watch as much of it as we can in the next 25 minutes so we can wrap up Adar is asking, why are there no comments? What are people feeling right now?
I'll share. Obviously, I'm white, and I, as was intended by the system, knew almost nothing about the history of this country. I discovered once I started learning about, the Black history that was completely hidden from my view. It was, it's just stunning to me, the level of ignorance that I had, and I'm sure still have. But I hadn't even hardly heard of James Baldwin before that I Am Not Your Negro movie came out. I didn't know about the Great Migration. It's just jaw-dropping to me. And I am very grateful for, that the information has now reached me. I feel enriched by now knowing the fuller, richer history of this country. On the other hand, I'm deeply appalled by the behavior of my fellow white people and frankly, my ancestors. About half of my ancestors were slaveholders. And, for about 5 seconds, you know, when I first started to think about it, I was like, maybe they were nice ones. I'm like, no. Anybody who owned people was not nice. And I see the continued injustice that Black people in this country continue to have. And I see all these laws about, you know, gun rights. And I'm like, oh yeah, if you're white, yeah, you can go and stand your ground. And you know that if any Black people start marching down the street with their guns, they're going to be toast. So I don't know. I just want to go and say just what I did, that I regret not having known the full history of this country. It was kept from me, and I'm angry about it. But I am appreciative of learning now, at least, of the truth. So that was my share.
Thank you, Gail. Would anyone else like to share? You have a comment in the chat. Growing up in the 60s, I did learn some, but not enough about Malcolm. I've always admired him for being so brave to speak hard truths. I have to sign off now, but thanks for telling us about the documentary. I will definitely be watching it. Anyone else? Anything that's coming up for them? Reflections?
It bothers me that not only did I not learn very much about Black history, but people are passing laws to make it even more difficult to learn about Black history. We're going backwards in some ways.
Thank you. Backwards in a lot of ways. This country is always, a lot of people like to feel like what's happening in our Supreme Court is an anomaly. It is not. We have always had a racist Supreme Court that has made racist decisions. That is America's consistency. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm thinking about violence, and the comment that the U.S. is rooted in violence. It was the purpose, basically the reason why it was created. And even thinking, just following the thread through, and I'm just sitting here thinking, thinking about the Supreme Court, thinking about the narratives, thinking about the modeling, thinking about who is allowed to be violent, who isn't, thinking about what violence looks like, what, all the different ways it shows up, and who's allowed to perpetrate it and who isn't, who is it done to, who is it done by. So just really sitting here sort of pulling all these threads together in that way, and just how it shows up in all parts of our lives, through law, through physical encounters, passing laws, education. I mean, as a white woman growing up in New England and really learning nothing about any of this, and really like folks commenting about that is just really resonating with me. And I know by now how much that there's so much that I missed, and it's just a disservice to every single person to have had that kept, and to have to do that work ourselves, when it's just really foundational to just everything. Everything, every part of our lives, it's everywhere all the time. And it's just sort of contending with that is just, it's just so big.
Thank you, Tammy. I'm trying to get to Adar's comment. I'm having an issue with my chat. Would someone please read Adar's comments for me, please?
Michelle, I just said that I was just totally agreeing with the last commenters. I'm sorry, I don't know who said that, with your comments. And I'm saying exactly that even how we define violence is racialized, because in the US, violence means Black. We don't talk about policy violence, which is instituted by majority white state legislatures and a white Congress and a majority white Supreme Court. We don't talk about white collar violence, things that happen every day with who has health care, who doesn't, what procedures are covered and for whom, what isn't, whose disability claims are accepted and whose are rejected. When we even talk about the jobs report or the unemployment report, we talk about it from the perspective of how it impacts white people in America. And we completely disappear the disproportionalities in Black and other non-Black communities of color. You know, when we send money to different countries to help them in their efforts, but we're rolling back child labor laws here and other things. We don't define that as violence. So even in the United States, violence as a concept is defined in ways that criminalize Black people and Black bodies, and that sanitize the ways in which majority white criminals implement violence, because their violence happens to be legal. And who votes these people in but other majority white people, a majority white populace?
Yes, thank you, Adar. Anyone else?
Dana has a comment.
Dana's comment says, which helps me understand why no conversation about Malcolm X in white or diverse spaces can start without a lengthy conversation about whether or how he was violent.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dana.
You know, Michelle, I find it very difficult to have conversations about Malcolm X in multiracial spaces or in Black-white spaces, because stuff like this happens. And I really appreciate the participants who really commented, because often it is the white silence or the silence of even people of color who are not Black, which speaks so loudly in these types of spaces, that there's a way in which it completely cuts off conversations, because then it is just Black people who are like sitting in the circle sharing what we feel, and white and other non-Black people of color who are kind of outside consuming what we're saying without contributing anything or revealing anything themselves. And that in itself is a form of racial violence, because Black people then are vulnerable in these spaces, and everyone else is picking and choosing how they want to participate in it. Because if Black people weren't talking, we would basically be sitting in silence watching some of the documentary.
Right. Thank you, Adar. Does anyone want to respond to what Adar said?
To a certain extent, I feel like I came here to learn, and sometimes I feel like I need to learn more before I can really say something that's relevant.
Would anyone like to respond to that?
Thank you. Even that is helpful to know. It is so much better than just the silence and the guessing what is going on for people. I really appreciate your sharing that.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say.
I'll just say that it, 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 it is hard. to know as a white person.
Could you expound? Hard to know what?
Yes. I realized I didn't say hardly anything. Part, there's all this acculturation of, as a white person, I want to do the right thing. I don't want to go and screw up. I want to be a good white person. Mm-hmm. And, it really fucking gets in my way. And I've done a lot of work with this. And I always, I'm worried that I'm going to veer into arrogance, that saying something like, I've done a lot of work. It's hard. It's just hard. But I like to believe that I have some humility about this. I like to believe that, well, I know that I'm going to screw up, mm-hmm. And I think here again, maybe this is arrogance, but I think that puts me ahead of a lot of white people, that I accept that I will screw up. I can hope that I will not screw up badly. I can hope that I will not screw up often, but I accept that I will. And I also would like to offer that when I do screw up, I regard it as an act of extreme generosity if a Black person will tell me that I have screwed up, that I have stepped in it. That is so powerful to me. And so that is what I would like to offer into this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Would anyone else like to share, respond?
Hi, my name is TJ, and did I cut someone off?
No, go ahead, TJ.
Okay. I was looking at the comment Dana posted about, helps me understand why no conversation about Malcolm X and white or diverse spaces can start without a lengthy conversation about whether or how he was violent. And I guess it was making me think about how it, as other folks have commented, like I grew up in Michigan, and I definitely didn't learn very much at all about civil rights in like middle school, high school, any of that. And so then, like, you talking about the self-studying that I've been trying to do, it really does lend itself to like certain people. Like, I was being very ignorant about things, and it's just hard to have conversations like when people are starting from such different levels. And I like how someone brought up that is such a shame, because it really is. It really like prevents conversations if we all don't get to like a baseline level where it's like, okay, if we can all start here for this thing, then we can talk about the next thing. And it is just, it's a lot to catch up on. And I can hear people's frustration that those who have been spending their lives doing this work, now want to bring people on, and we're so far behind. That is very frustrating.
Thank you, TJ.
I was gonna say, I think that when we're learning these things, and I say we as a collective, because some of this history is also hidden from Black people, that to give yourself some space and grace to recognize that, like, okay, well, I'm learning something, and to sit with that, but to ask questions and to wonder out loud, because these are the spaces that we actually want to do that. Mm-hmm. It's like, if you do make a mistake, I would much rather you make a mistake in this space than a mistake outside, even though that's going to happen. But this is also a space to learn and unpack and to question. And so, I mean, I know that we are you know, like I know that people, particularly white people, they want to be good white people, but like I always I understand it because I have my own biases that I have to work through, and I want to be a good person. But that doesn't happen, I think, unless we start to reckon with the lie that we've been told and unpacking the lie. And you know, like I said, you have to go really deep with these questions, not just with Malcolm, but like, why are we in a country that is lying to us about what this story is?
Right.
It's not just about the Black people, and we can question like what his ultimate action might have been, or what country he wanted Black folks to go to, or whether, you know, whatever that is. But the real question should also be like, but why don't I know that? You know what I mean? And so I think that helps us unpack some other deeper things that I think we're really sitting in the uncomfortable muck of what has been, of what our country is and what racism and oppression have done. And so I think, you know, giving yourself space and grace, but particularly in these spaces, to ask hard questions of us and of yourself. And that's also a part of the work, and that being the good person, you've been being the good person. We need you to be a critical person in this space when you're doing this work. And that is sometimes I think I see with white people very, very hard to do, because you want to be good, but the good is not getting us where we need to be. And so we have to be critical of ourselves, of the things that we know and don't know, and we have to dig very, very deep. So I just invite everyone to at least think about that.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. I think that when we, well, first I want to acknowledge the fact that as people in this country, we are so uncomfortable in talking about race. It's a thing that we're seeing and dealing with every day, all the time. And we have been socialized not to talk about it. And I just want to acknowledge what's happening right now and how uncomfortable this probably is for a lot of us. And I want us to realize that is not on accident, that is on purpose, that we don't feel comfortable talking about this and naming it and discussing it and speaking up. So I just want to name that. Anyone else like to share?
I just want to say I appreciate people speaking in the space. Thank you all so much.
So we only have 12 minutes left. I don't think we should start the documentary. I really urge you all to watch it. It's so well done. It spans so much of Malcolm's life. And I can't even begin to talk about all the amazing things that he did, especially as being one of the forefathers of the Pan-African Black Power movement, the Black nationalist movement. So I really urge you all, when you have time, to watch the documentary. Dana, could you pop the link for the documentary in the chat? Is that possible?
Michelle, while that is happening, I would like to urge everybody that as you learn more about Malcolm X and about how he has been misrepresented, mischaracterized, maligned by white media and this country, to think again about movements like the Black Panther movement, because the same thing has happened. Think about Black Lives Matter and the way that that the rebellion against oppression of Black people in this country is treated differently than when we look at rebellions in other countries, in France, in Israel. You know, those, you started out saying this, Michelle, movements against oppression in other countries by white people are treated with much more empathy, understanding, respect, and acknowledgement of their humanity. than these very similar movements if they have Black faces. Right. So as you're thinking about how Malcolm X was misrepresented, please give a thought to the Panthers. Some Panthers are still imprisoned all these years later, while January 6th insurrectionists didn't get half the sentence. And they tried to overthrow the government and people were killed. So it's a bigger issue than Malcolm X. It does go to American anti-Blackness.
Right.
Just give a thought to that bigger issue, please.
Thank you so much, Adar.
And can I also say before you go, Michelle, but like, in that this is just a tipping point, because if it's a lie about Malcolm and it's a lie about, Martin, in all honesty, because if you read some of Martin's texts, a lot of those things were considered radical of that day. If it's about the Black Panthers that you don't know, imagine all the other groups of people who look just like you, who are white, who were out here using violence, honestly, and talking about what is actually happening. So this is just a tipping point, it's the tip of the iceberg of a story of like what violence actually is and what revolution actually is and what it looks like. And I think that if anything, I would use Malcolm as a portal to gaining another side of like what history actually looks like and what does it mean to be in a fight when something is wrong, when you have moral wrongs shaping a country. So that's, I think, if anything, is only just it just widens your scope.
Thank you, Julia. TJ has another comment in the chat. Try to read it. I hear that white culture, I haven't really unpacked that, but I'm curious to learn about how other cultures handle conflict resolution and embrace conflict as a method of growth. We have 8 more minutes. Were there any other thoughts, reflections, comments?
Can I just ask people where they plan to go now? What do you plan on doing? I mean, it's one thing to be exposed to something. Where do you go from here? Once 8:30 comes and we all sign off, what is in it for you in terms of your own growth and your own using what you've learned here, experienced here, seen here, heard here? Where does that go for you, or does it just stay here?
Thank you for that, Adar.
I can make a comment. I'm thinking a lot here about how I consider myself a pacifist, and I think a lot about weapons. I work with public defenders. We do Second Amendment litigation, and I'm thinking about the right to bear arms. And I'm just thinking of my own personal stance, but then also what it means in the larger context of society and history to have the right to have a weapon to defend yourself and your family. And that my fear is an individual, personal, one white woman fear against the tide of what it means to live in a country built on violence, where rights are not equal, the Constitution is not applied equally, and where having rights are so much, they mean an infinitely bigger, they have an infinitely bigger meaning for other people that is beyond my scope of my pacifist stance for my own self. So just really considering the history and the work that people were doing to try to make that clear to our society that there needs to be a right, because there is a danger of just constant danger and constant violence being done against people, and they have the right to defend themselves, and what that means as a whole versus us as individuals who might wish that we didn't have to contend with that thing. Just really like a tidal wave compared to us as individuals. I think especially as white people, if those of us who sit with that sort of thought on a regular basis, what that means to have that in comparison to large groups of people who really don't have a choice but to have the opposite stance.
Right, that there's privilege in even being a pacifist, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Anyone else like to answer Adar's question? Where are you going next? What are you going to do with this information?
Hey, this is TJ again. I'm starting to try to think of like younger white folks in my life. I'm thinking of maybe my cousins who are having kids now, like a couple years old, and like connecting with them to like, even if I can't get to them, can I get to the kids to make sure that the kids don't grow up and graduate high school without having had to think about it a little bit, even as from like the weird uncle sort of thing, but like just kind of forcing that on them, I guess. Like, how do I potentially start like forcing it on people in a way where, you know, they might have to like decide that like they don't want to talk to me anymore, but especially like with the younger folks, like, okay, can I like talk to them, get them thinking, and then have them talk to their parents who are maybe around my age, just a little bit older.
Thank you, TJ.
And I would suggest, TJ, that you may want to equip yourself in order to have these types of conversations, so that you can make, I mean, I have a 12-year-old niece, right? And speaking to her and in ways that are appropriate for what she can understand at the age, ways in which, you know, are very matter of fact, ways, what, you know, things that I am equipped to answer with her, so that I'm not like necessarily forcing anything on her, but teaching her accurate history and then giving her the tools that she needs to definitely think. So I issue an open invitation, not only to you, but to everybody, to continue to engage with BRJA, because it is this type of equipping of white people, Black people, non-Black people of color that we do, not only about racism, but around other issues that impact historically marginalized populations in the United States and abroad.
Thank you, Adar. Another thing I would say, TJ, and we've had conversations around this at other events, around a lot of people push back on white children learning about race in America with this argument that, you know, they're innocents, right? And Black children are not afforded the same innocence. They don't have that luxury because they are experiencing racism. And so we, as parents of Black children, we are forced to talk about it. We don't get a choice in that. And but just pushing against that narrative that white children should be shrouded in innocence and, you know, kind of kept from these things. And that is just, you know, false. And also that white children are receiving messages about race even when we don't talk about it. The absence of talking about it is still a message.
And I just want to quickly say that I don't know how many people got on here and said, no, I did not know this history, whether they were, as far as I can tell, Black or white people on this line, right? And that, again, that didn't happen by accident, that there are actively parents, adults that are making sure that these are not in our history books, and that we are the adults that are supposed to be doing the work to make sure that those stories are accurately told and put in those books. And so part of that is our work. And that's our responsibility for that next generation to be able to get that information that we weren't able to access, at least in the classroom. Thankfully, there are more resources outside of the classroom to be able to receive those. But I'm just giving that push that like that is part of our action and our work as adults who know better, that want better for the next generation.
Thank you, Anthony. Dana, could we pull up our slides on social media? So if you're not connected to BRJA, so that you can stay connected with the workshops that we offer every 13th of the month, we will be doing events that have to do with race, racism, white supremacy, and how it intersects with all things that happen in American life. Yeah, so if we could get that slide if people are not connected. We are a small nonprofit and we do accept donations. You can use the QR code or visit us at bemoreantiracist.org/donate. Dana, are you saying we don't have the slide for the social media? Oh, okay. Sorry, y'all. We don't have the slide for social media, but we are on Instagram, we're on YouTube, and we are on Facebook, and you can look for us under Baltimore Racial Justice Action. Please connect with us if you haven't already. I thank you all for taking your time out this evening to have this conversation. Once again, please watch the documentary, Make It Plain on PBS. Please pull up Malcolm's speeches and listen to the words he has to say that he has left for us as gifts that we can still use today. And thank you all for joining us, and we'll be here again next month, August 13th. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.